Hi, I'm Mike Lardy.
I'm Daniel Mears, and today we're continuing our mini blog series on what discipleship really looks like. If you watched last week's video, we gave you kind of an overview and a sneak peek into what discipleship at Woodlands actually looks like. And we told you that there's three elements when it comes to discipleship. There's teaching, there's authenticity and accountability, and there's training and releasing. And over the next 3 weeks, we're going to tackle all three of these elements in depth so that you know what discipleship really looks like. And so today we're going to tackle the first one, which is teaching. Now, if we look at the American culture and American education system, very few of us would disagree with the statement that the education system is failing. It seems like we have overcrowding in the schools. We have 30 or 40 kids in the classroom, a higher dropout rate, low test scores, and even those who do end up graduating seem to be so low and proficient even when they graduate school, that we've got a major education problem. Now, it's interesting that we would all agree with that, though, but look at the church and realize that we do the very same thing when it comes to teaching our people. A guy like me stands up for an hour on Sunday morning and teaches in a lecture style of teaching with a large crowd of people. And so if we say that the education system in America doesn't work, then why do we as a church do it? And what's the solution?
Well, the solution is to condense the size of the people that you're trying to reach. And so I've heard it said that like preaching in the way that you're talking about from Sunday morning is like having a hospital room full of babies crying for milk and you're running around squirting it throughout the air and hoping that some of the milk lands in the babies' mouths and you're lucky if it hits some and then they get nourishment and they grow. And so that's just kind of how the problem of trying to teach in the lecture format to a large group really ultimately fails to result in spiritual growth, spiritual maturity, which is what we're looking for and which is the point of discipleship. So the solution that Daniel and I have found, the solution that we have arrived on, is a technique called storying, and it's very conversational. Storying is where you present a Bible story. You notice that most of the passages in the Bible, about 80%, come in a story format. So God knew this ahead of time. He knew that our minds would be intrigued by stories, that they would retain stories, that we could recall them when we need them and apply the lessons. And so storying is the solution. And so why is it so powerful? Well, because it allows you to ask questions about the story. And if you can get the people to relate to a character or an event in the story, it works really, really powerfully to enable them to put themselves in those shoes and then wrestle with things in their life. And so it just works. One of the things that we've seen just in our groups is the fact that people really open up. And it's those times of opening up where you're vulnerable, where you have high trust with the other individuals in the group. It's those times where God really uses those to impact people, to make decisions, or to start something new in their life. And so that's why storying worked and has worked for us in our groups. And so you were going to talk a little bit about how Jesus modeled this for us.
Well, yeah, if you watched last week's video, for us, it's not that Mike and I read some great book on discipleship or went to some great conference, which we did. It's that what we found is Jesus' model of discipleship. Somebody has taught us about Jesus' model, and we've learned from Jesus' model, and Jesus is the greatest example of disciple making. And so if we look at Jesus, he is the perfect example of a storyteller and a teacher. Why? Well, number one, Mike hit on this already, but by Jesus' example, though Jesus is famous for preaching to large groups of people, more often he was teaching one-on-one, one-on-three, one-on-5, or at the most, 1-on-12. And so when we teach, we should be teaching in a small group where we have relationships and we have the ability to communicate one-on-one, not just a teacher in a lecture format that's trying to get information out to a large group of people, but now I can have a relationship, a conversation, and a discussion. Secondly, like Mike also said, Jesus taught in story. Time after time, he's telling stories or parables. And then the third example of Jesus is leading by example. Jesus didn't just teach something and then leave the disciples and his followers off to do it on their own. Jesus led by example. He showed them how to deal with sin, how to love people, how to care for people, and how to lead people the right way. And so in all ways, when it comes to discipleship, and particularly in teaching, we look at Jesus' example.
Exactly. And so how do you story? Well, if we're looking at Jesus' example, we see that, let's say he wanted to teach on prayer. Well, he gave an example. He gave a story to his disciples, and he said that there were two men who came to the temple to pray. And one man was righteous, and he would walk up to the temple and say, "I'm so thankful, Lord, that I am generous, that I am great, that I give a tenth of all that I get, right to the smallest amount of whatever I get, I give a tenth. And I thank you that I'm not like this sinner over here. And then Jesus tells the story from the perspective of the sinner, the other man. He comes up to the temple, and by contrast, he stands with his face down, and he doesn't even go near, and he just says, Lord, and he beats his chest, Lord, have mercy on me, a sinner. And he walks away, and Jesus says, who do you think walked away from the temple justified? And the disciples are obviously have a powerful reason to say, or a powerful, compelling reason to say, well, it was the other man, it was the sinner who left justified. And so that's basically how we story through our small groups each week, as we present something that Jesus taught, or another story from Scripture or the Old Testament, and then we just tell it from memory, accurately, convincingly, and then we ask some simple questions that we've designed for you to ask, and that's how it goes.
Yeah, and so that was a perfect example, very short example of storying. You tell a story, you retell or rebuild the story with the people that you're discipling, and then you use some pointed questions, just like Jesus did. And so there's a picture of the way we teach in discipleship. To close, I just want to say this. If you're a disciple maker right now and you're out there in the trenches week after week, I want to just encourage you. Mike and I are so proud of you, and we want you to know that we know what you're doing. It's not easy. We know it's difficult, and we know you go through times where people aren't showing up at times, where people are getting sick, and where it's hard to get together. Just keep at it, okay? You are doing what Jesus commanded the church to do, and it's not supposed to be easy. And so just stay at it. We're here for you. Let us know if you need anything. Give us a call. We would love to encourage you in that. And if you're not a disciple maker, we're so happy to share these building blocks with you about discipleship, and we can't wait to get you involved, hopefully in the near future. So have a great Thanksgiving, and we'll see you next week.